Hello and welcome to Low Volume Small Form Factor.net's podcast. My name is Josh Ramirez, aka PlayfulPhoenix, and today I am joined by, of course, James Schell, aka Aibohphobia. James, how you doing?
Doing good. Once again, it's been a while since we've recorded, so it's nice. And for the for those listening to this after the fact, it probably won't be a big deal. But we do apologize for the long delay between episodes. So we're working on it. So hopefully it won't be as much of a gap in the future. But yeah.
Indeed. We're also joined by John Morrison, aka Confusis. How are you doing, John?
I'm present, which is different. Most of the delays have been my fault. Sorry, guys.
Damn it, John! It's all your fault.
Yeah,
it's not all your fault.
just 90%. Someone decided to get sick.
The blame is shared across all of us. It's fine.
Mostly me.
Well, look. Let's just go ahead and jump straight into the news because we actually do have a decent amount to talk about for this episode, and we're going to start, John, with a piece that actually you wrote a short while ago. An OEM AM4 motherboard makes an appearance, actually manufactured by HP of all people. So if you could speak to sort of what this is all about and the importance of it, that'd be great.
Well, with AMD Zen, I've been keeping an eye on it, just because the information that's been available has been quite hard to come by recently. There's not the usual level of leaks coming out of AMD that there normally is. But when the AM4 platform was first, When the AM4 platform was first kind of mentioned by AMD to the public, there was going to be the starting period where we'd have AM4 boards with current generation processors and APUs. So we're just starting to see those pop up on the market now, and HP seems to have gotten there first with the HP EliteDesk 705 G3 SFF, and probably many more liters depending on what you specify, but yeah. So it's just a small form factor desktop. Well done. We like it. And it's got a selection of various APUs. It's all still based on the current architecture, so there's nothing new and exciting here. But kind of hoping there's the ability to upgrade in the future to the new models. But because of HP launching this particular product, we also get to see stuff like what the socket looks like finally, what the cooler mounting things look like. Although it's difficult to tell with it being an OEM board, they generally have slightly different mounting patterns. So, like the demo boards that we saw a few months ago, this board also has a square mounting pattern. But since I wrote this article, we've also seen a Gigabyte board that has the more traditional AMD rectangular mounting layout. Apart from that, the major changes that you can see from the motherboard that HP has produced is there's very little in the way of chipset stuff. So there's only a very, very small platform controller hub, and that's it. There's no North Bridge, South Bridge layout like the AM3 platform. There's no massive heat sinks on anything. It's all integrated into the CPU, which is great. Should mean make it easier to produce smaller motherboards. Like I might actually see a high performance AMD system on ITX again.
Yay!
Yay!
It's been a long time.
I'm excited. The last true CPU based AMD ITX was the Asus. What was it?
I forget the model
deluxe
number,
board,
but it's an interesting board because it has
SODIMs.
Yeah, it has SODIM, which I really wish that would become more of a thing, because like DDR4, I don't know. Like, I don't see with DDR4 there being that much advantage having like the really fancy high clocked stuff. So like,
especially with the CPU over an APU.
Yeah, so I really wish we would see more SODIM adoption in the desktop space for mini ITX, just for space savings. I don't know. I think that would just, especially like with, we'll talk about this later. With Samsung, I think's addressed a lot of it, but there's still a lot of concern about like thermal throttling on the M.2 drives. So I think like if they switch to SODIMM, that would leave that would leave enough space to put M.2 on the top side, even on Mini ITX. So I think doing that would be address people's concerns about thermal throttling. So I don't know, but yeah, that one AMD board you're talking about from ASUS was a really interesting one. But
The M4 A88 Ti Deluxe.
yep. Actually, I
had one.
I have a dead one of those.
I had a living one of those.
Oh,
It was
really?
awesome.
Yeah. But yeah, that was like what, 3 or 4 years ago that came out, or even
No.
longer.
No, longer than
Yeah.
that.
And then we
I'm going closer to like 6.
yeah, and then there's been nothing
'Cause
since then. So yeah.
So the only small form factor stuff we've had is the FM2 Plus platform, which you're limited to quad cores.
Yeah, but this HP board's kind of weird though. This AM4 HP board, because like, I guess it makes sense for the chassis it's meant to go in, but like the 24 pins like on the bottom right corner, which is weird. So I don't know, but yeah,
I'm guessing it's sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I'm guessing they've just rehashed the the Elite Desk 705 G2 case, and the power supply is below the slots
Yeah, so,
in that particular case. So I'm guessing that that's
yeah,
just
it lets them
shorter
have a
cable,
really
less copper.
short 24 pin cable, but it is
Yeah,
kind
less
of
copper.
But yeah, I am hoping though that the square heatsink pattern's like the final version.
It's not.
Is it? I thought
It's
Noctua
not.
said something about that the AM4 would be more. What did they say? Like it wouldn't have the kind of like the direction issues that the current socket or the current mounting system has.
Everything I've seen that isn't OEM, so basically that 1 gigabyte board, it's a rectangular mounting pattern, but it's slightly wider.
So it's like in between. Okay.
It's an in-between, but it's still going to have directional issues,
Well, we'll see then, I guess.
which is a shame. Let's see if I can find a picture for you guys. 1 moment, please. All of the quick Googling in the background.
Click.
I guess while you're doing that, like I noticed though, like, man, these new AM4 processors are going to be a nightmare if you bend the pins on the chip. There's so many pins, so many.
How many pins? I can't remember exactly what the number is.
It's a lot. There's a lot of pins. I mean,
And saying that, have you seen the new Knightsbridge socket?
oh, that thing's well, it's insane, but I mean, that's not something most people will ever run into, though.
No. It's socket. Oh, was it socket 3000 something?
Yeah, it's insane. But like the AM4, I think. Oh, I forget. But I mean, just looking at the picture though, it's crazy. Because like, I've ripped many of the AMD CPU out of its socket because the heatsink was like glued to it because of old thermal paste.
1331. Sorry.
Gosh, that's a lot of pins. So I can just imagine doing the same thing, because the problem is like there's a lot of them, and then they're also spaced really tightly together. So yeah, like I can imagine like 5, 6, 7 years once these machines are like kind of old and the thermal paste is worn out, just accidentally ripping them out of their sockets. So that's going to be
Twist
fun
and
to
pull
fix.
directly upwards.
Well,
This is a trick I learned from back in the Pentium days.
I mean, I try, but sometimes it's just unavoidable bending them.
Yeah.
And like it's going to be
But you
worse
could do the
now.
same just by dropping the CPU in an LGA socket. And those are harder to bend back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any hoodles.
So is this HP system, is it like out yet? Like, can you go out and buy it?
When I wrote the article, I couldn't find it. Actually, I'll check the usual and check Newegg. 705 G3. They're very much we're ready to launch it. However, it does not look like it's quite out yet. But going by the fact that they've released it, they've got a web page for it on their official website. I'm guessing it's very close. No idea on pricing yet, which is a shame. But I had a look at the G2 pricing, and you're looking at about $1,000 for $1,000 New Zealand dollars for a base system. So probably about 500 US.
Sounds about right. I mean, and really what's interesting about this is just the information we're able to learn about AM4 itself. More than the actual board. All right, well, pretty cool. In fact, actually, the next story on our docket similarly is about a motherboard that we know a little bit more about and is interesting, but in a very different way. James, this is a story you wrote just a few days ago on the ASRock Z170M-PIO2. And I was actually not familiar with the acronym PIO, or Parts in One, which is basically a DIY kit for a motherboard. And then this one also has some unusual stuff going on with the PCI Express slot. If you could elaborate a bit.
So PIO is Parts in One. So it's basically an all-in-one that you build yourself. So that's what that is. So it's not, it doesn't, as far as I can tell, it's not really a thing outside of Asia. So I think, because I've never found an actual like PIO like bare bone chassis to buy here in like North America. So it looks like it's just like a kind of maybe like a China only type of thing. Because I've just never seen, like, the motherboards show up on like places like ASRock's website, but then like you never see it for sale here, and then you never see anything else like the other parts you need to go with it. But what they are is they're and this isn't the first one, so there's a few other motherboards like this, but basically it's either like a mini ITX or a little bit bigger than mini ITX motherboard, except there is a PCI Express X16 slot, but it's at the top edge of the motherboard. And then not only is it on the top edge of the motherboard instead of on the bottom edge, is that the slot is angled so that the video card is kind of like parallel to the motherboard. And so basically it lets you have kind of like a flat system without needing to use like PCIe, like risers or extenders, because those can be kind of problematic and expensive. So it's interesting, like, and what it is like this form factor is not new. Like, we've seen boards like this for like a year or two now, but they've all been like the low end, like B150 chipset and stuff like that. So this is interesting because it's, as far as I can tell, it's the first one of these type of boards with like a high-end chipset. It's a Z170 chipset on this particular one. So that is, it's interesting, as in like it's cool that this exists, though. Like I said, like I've never seen any of the other ones for sale, so I kind of doubt we'll ever see this for sale either, outside of like the Chinese market. So it's kind of like just of academic interest. I don't know if anybody here will ever actually be able to get their hands on one. So I don't know. It's just cool that it exists, though. I don't know, like there's like, I don't know, it's opens up neat possibilities for type of like custom cases and stuff. So I don't know, it's just cool to think about it, but I don't know. On the other hand, though, it's like we'll probably never be able to buy it. So yeah,
it's interesting though.
Suppose it's how good you are with AliExpress and Alibaba if you can find one.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm a little surprised that something like that isn't a bit more popular. And it's a very feature complete board for what it is. I mean, you've kind of got the chicken and egg problem of you need the enclosure that would work with how they've set up the PCI slot and such. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I'm happy that this is a thing. It's a neat piece of kit. All right, so I think that's all we have for this episode with respect to motherboards. We're going to move on to coolers, which I know, James, you were saying aren't the most exciting thing in the world to you presently, although I think this one is interesting in its own right. Just
yes,
because
this one's neat, but
yes,
most of them aren't.
So for this, we're actually going to take a peek at a forum thread on Small Form Factor Forum. And this has been rumored for a while. Basically, Thermaltake, I don't know if they acquired or they partnered up with Coolchip, which is a company that developed what they call a kinetic cooler. In fact, I'm really not terribly familiar with the technology behind it, but it's...
Yeah, so it's kind of a convoluted history. So like Sandia Labs, which is I think a government, like a United States government-funded lab or R&D lab, developed this technology first, and then it's a little fuzzy, like what happened, like whether Coolchip is like licensing the technology or like they just outright borrowed it. I don't know. It's kind of fuzzy. And then like I think it was a year or two ago, Coolchip showed up at I think it was CES, like in partnership with Cooler Master actually.
Yeah.
And then like it was like branded as like a Cooler Master product, and then they had like demos at the booth and like were showing off prototypes and stuff, and then just like absolutely nothing was heard of them after that until now, and now it shows up as a Thermaltake product. So I don't know, it's a weird, I don't know, like I don't know if anybody knows really like what all has happened with the technology and its kind of path towards like actual market. But the way the basic technology works is that you have like the base plate that's like attached to like your processor, so that part's pretty much normal. Like whereas the difference though is that most heat sinks transfer heat to like the fins, like which actually dissipate the heat to the air. Like the transfer between the base plate and the fins is usually done either just like direct contact, like the fins are just like directly attached to the base plate, or more commonly with high-end coolers with heat pipes, which are more efficient at transferring the heat from one to the other. And then there's a couple that use vapor chambers, which I won't get into how those work, but those are fairly rare though. So what the difference is with this unit is that the impeller, so like basically the fan that moves the air, the spinning part, on most heat sinks it's just like a plastic thing. On this one it's metal.
Yeah.
But it's not just like a metal fan though, because I mean that would be interesting, I guess, but I mean it wouldn't really be all that different from like a normal heat sink just having a metal fan. What's different here is that the impeller is actually the heat is getting transferred to the metal impeller via the air gap, which seems very counterintuitive. Like the air is normally like a insulator, but what it is, it's like, I don't know, it'd be best to look at pictures because it's a little hard to explain. But basically there's like concentric grooves in the impeller and then the base plate that kind of fit together, and like it's a very, very narrow gap, so like they have to be machined very precisely, which I think's probably a big part of why it's taken so long to go from just kind of like R&D prototypes to mass production, because like precise machining is expensive when you do it at scale. I mean it's just difficult and time consuming and yada yada. So but it's a really narrow gap, and so I'm not sure exactly how the physics of it work, but I like it. They call it an air bearing, and I think just like the very narrow air gap, and then with the parts spinning, it actually becomes very efficient at transferring heat, and so like it's able to transfer the heat from the base plate to the metal impeller. So then the metal impeller is sucking up all this heat, and then it's spinning. So then you got this air flowing through it, and so it transfers the heat. And supposedly it's very space efficient in doing so. So they're able to make a very small cooler that's able to handle, I think they're saying a 70 watt TDP for this cooler, which is like a 1U cooler. It's very short. I think it's, I don't see the height, but yeah, it's a really short.
27 millimeters.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And though I think on the original design, like the original like Sandy and Coolchip ones, it was just the impeller. But it looks like on, I think, both the Cooler Master version and now the Thermaltake version, it still has like a set of traditional like aluminum fins, which I guess are just for kind of like supplemental cooling. So I don't know. It's really interesting technology. It's probably like one of the most innovative things we've seen in like tradition, like in like air coolers for computers in quite some time. But it's very much unproven technology though. Like all we've ever seen of it so far are just kind of like prototypes. So, and it's always been, I don't think we've ever seen like independent data of this. It's always been just kind of the manufacturer specs, which are pretty bold for this one. I think they're claiming like 13 to 25 dBA for a noise level, which seems extremely optimistic to me, especially that 13 number. We'll see. But if it actually can perform anything close to what it says it can, it'll be it could definitely be a game changer for SFF cooling.
Yeah, Thermaltake, if you're listening, we're willing to check the data that you've put up. Just send us one of these. We'll put it through its paces. We'll see if it can actually do what you say it does.
Well, I'm just interested. I mean, to me, it's curious that to sort of feature the technology rather than go with the obvious thing, which would be just like a super high performance cooler. They've kind of went with something that's a little more mundane but has the unique profile, and I guess it looks kind of interesting as well. I mean, I'm curious as to what folks will think when they get their hands on it and how it'll behave and all of this.
I think part of that maybe is just like it is a small cooler, so it's not suitable for like a heavily overclocked like 6700K or anything. But I think it may be because it's just they maybe wanted to start out with something that has like a smaller chunk of metal flying around, so that it is easier to manufacture.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it has to be like
a lot of mess there.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be machined really precisely, and it has to be balanced really well because it's a chunk of metal spinning like I don't know how many RPM, but it's going pretty fast. So I imagine it was just easier from a manufacturing perspective to start out with something that's very small rather than like something that's designed specifically to handle like 150 watt TDP.
It's 2500 RPM.
Yeah, so you got a chunk of metal spinning at 2500 RPM.
That is a moderately terrifying.
Yeah.
And the whole thing weighs about 310 grams. So if we kind of guesstimate half of that, is that the fan blades itself? That's still a fair bit of mass spinning around.
Yeah. I can see the lawsuits now. People sticking their fingers in it.
I put my finger in it.
Yep.
It only takes one failure, right?
And that is interesting. Like they didn't put like a fan grill on it, which I would have thought they would have. So
it's cheese slicer.
Yeah.
Oh, cheese grater.
So I don't know. We'll see. I hope they have good insurance.
I'm saying that we've seen some pretty sharp plastic fans before. So yeah.
Yeah. At least with the plastic though, generally like. I mean, I've done this before on accident where I've stuck my finger in a fan, and I mean I haven't gotten any serious injuries from it, but I've broken a couple fan blades doing that. But
I've had some decent gashes out of Yate loans and Yate server fans.
No, yeah, server fans.
The
yeah,
40
I always treat server fans with the utmost respect because those things will take your
10,000
finger
RPM 40 mil ones.
Yeah. Oh, 40 mil wouldn't be so bad, but like those 120 millimeter like Delta fans. Oh, you gotta be careful around those things.
A 40 mil fan at 10,000 RPM can still do some damage.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's like it's so like the blades are so small though, like you can't really like.
It'll cut you, but it'll stop right there because there's no mass behind it.
Yeah, and also it's just like there's not that much room for you to really like get your finger in there, like in between the blades. Like
they somehow managed.
Yeah. So anyway, though, I'd be curious to see like how well. I mean, there's no fan grill, obviously, but I'm wondering if maybe there's like I don't know.
I know. No,
the safety aspects on this.
Right. There's got to be something, right?
I wonder if the manual just will be like half of it will be dedicated to like don't stick your finger in the fan or any color.
Don't stick your finger or any other part of your body in there.
All right. Well, we'll learn more as people get their hands on it and availability becomes a thing. But it's certainly a curiosity in the cooling space, which is pretty slow moving, pretty boring. So it's always kind of neat to see people try
real quick though. Jord brought this up in the chat. So that is an interesting concern because like I mentioned, is that you have like kind of these concentric grooves that are kind of nested within each other between the impeller and the base plate, and like it's very, very closely fitted to each other. So kind of like there's kind of the question of like, well, what if you bump the case? So what it is like the air bearing is not, I think in the maybe like one of the very, very original designs, like the air bearing was like the primary support. But on the later, like I think the Coolchip prototypes and then like the Cooler Master and now the Thermaltake versions is that there is like a normal bearing that is most of the support for the impeller. Like I don't know, it's probably a ball bearing if I had to guess, but there is like a shaft in the middle and then like bearings that kind of support it. So I'm assuming that's enough to kind of cover like kind of most like small bumps and knocks and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it is kind of a concern, like if you just like really give it a good knock, like if maybe you could cause the impeller to contact the base plate and damage it. So we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah, it'll probably be the other half of the manual will be like, don't bump the case while it's operating or something. So yeah, it is, but I mean, I have a bad habit of like not caring, so I've actually I think damaged a few fans like this. I think the bearings didn't like the fan being shifted from like a horizontal to a vertical position while running. Yeah, so like I don't know, because like it's just like, well, I need to lay it on its side so I can get the panel open, and it's like, well, I have stuff open. I don't want to turn the computer off, so I just set it on its side while it's operating. Because I have solid state drives, because like I would not dare to do that if it had hard drives in it, but it's all solid state, so it's like, yeah, whatever. And not to get too off topic, but like I've noticed that Noctua fans don't seem to care if you do that. Like if you just move it around all over the place while they're running, like I don't know. Yeah, so it's just kind of one of those things that. Well, it's not that just that they're FDB, because there's like the ones that I've damaged are the Prolimatech. I forget the model number. They're the 140 millimeter ones with the white blades.
Is that how you pronounce it, Prolimatech?
I think so.
Okay. No, I've always pronounced it Prolimatech.
Tomato.
Potato.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So anyway, like I forget the mod. There's like 2 or 3 models that are like that with the black frame and white blades, 140 millimeter. I forget which one it is, but anyway, they have FDB. So like they're the nice bearings, but like after, because they weren't even going that fast. They were only going like 800 RPM. But I had the computer, I think vertical, and I moved it to horizontal or vice versa, whatever. But after I did that, I noticed that they now have like a slight rasping noise. So like it I guess because they didn't before, I knew that, and now they do. And I've done this twice actually, with 2 different ones of those same model. And now they both have kind of like a rasping noise at low RPMs, which is annoying. And then, as far as I can tell, I damaged the bearings just from moving it. And then, but I've done this like I've done the same thing many times with multiple different Noctua fans. I've never had that problem, so anyway, so yay Noctua. But yeah, I'm really interested like how this thing, the Thermaltake thing will oh, and I don't think we've mentioned the name of it. It's the Engine 27 is the name of it, which is a stupid name. I don't know what the 27 refers to. Oh, I think the 27 refers to the height.
Probably could.
but the engine part doesn't make sense. But
Well,
anyway,
maybe it's the little cooler that could.
yeah. So yeah, it's the Thermaltake Engine 27 is the name of this thing. But yeah, I'll be really interested to see how it handles like being moved while in operation. Because
for
I mean,
sure.
I don't know. Like on a small form factor system that it's kind of aimed at, it'd be much more likely that the system will get moved around while the fan is spinning. So I wonder if they've kind of taken that into consideration or not. But anyway, that was my little aside, so we can move on now.
Well, I've certainly received quite the education in terms of coolers. But now we're going to move on to something that is a bit more interesting to me, just because, as frequent listeners of the show, and certainly as John and James know, I find storage and SSD storage in particular, and then within SSD storage, and VM storage in particular, to be super interesting. And Samsung indeed, just a few weeks ago, announced the 960 Pro and 960 Evo, which are all of those things. They are M.2 drives using their latest technology, 3D vertical NAND, 48-layer VNAND, so that's the newest generation. And then, of course, the main difference being the underlying technology for those. So the Pro is using MLC versus the Evo, which uses TLC. Also awesome to me, in fact, this is perhaps one of the most exciting things about the Pro, is the fact that storage tiers, it used to start at 256 gig and go up to, I believe, 1 terabyte. So they've ditched 256 and they've basically doubled all the tiers. So you'll be able to get it in 512 gigs, 1 terabyte, and finally, 2 terabytes. 2 terabytes of ludicrously fast storage in this tiny, like, gum stick sized package is basically the difference between someone like me being able to use a drive like that exclusively versus having to complement it with another SSD or, God forbid, a regular old creaky hard drive. So, James, you wrote the article on this, but I was very, very excited to read it just because, man, oh man, if and when I build a desktop computer, all my money is just going into storage.
Yeah, I mean, you basically covered everything. I mean, of course, it's very fast as expected for a next-gen Samsung M.2 drive. So the Pro does, I think, 3,500 megabytes per second read, 2,100 write. Evo does 3,200 and then 1,900 respectively for best case. So, yep, smoking fast. Though, I mean, I don't know if necessarily that extra speed versus, say, like the 950 Pro is going to be that noticeable in the real world. So to me, one of the more interesting things is there's been a lot of concern, and I think to some degree even just kind of like FUD, just like fear, uncertainty, and doubt about like thermal throttling on high performance M.2 drives. And so to the point that Asus on the Z170 Impact, their flagship mini ITX board, they actually ditched the M.2 that they kind of pioneered supporting on like a high-end ITX board with like the previous Impacts, and they went with a U.2 connector. And their reasoning was, I think a large part of it was that like even though it's kind of an awkward, bulky connector, especially for an SFF system, because you have this like stiff cable that then you can't really customize, like you can't shorten it. It's like whatever you get's what you're stuck with. And then it has like a power connector coming off of it. And it's just a mess. But like their reasoning is that like a 2.5-inch drive with a beefy heatsink that you could position away from the motherboard and like the other heat generating components would prevent the drive from having any kind of thermal issue. And then like, so that annoyed me. And then like there's just like I noticed like within kind of like just like on other forums and Reddit and stuff, like a lot of people who aren't as familiar with like SFF and stuff just have a lot of like kind of concern and doubts about thermal throttling on M.2, which it is a thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's just like completely just like fabricated or anything. I mean, it does happen. Like the like the 950 Pro and other M.2 drives like it do thermal throttle a lot, especially on like an SSF system where like it's on the back side of the motherboard and there's not very good cooling back there and like stuff like that. So it does happen. I think people kind of overstate how much of an effect it has on actual real world performance, because it's really easy to make it happen on a benchmark where it just like you do like sustained like reads and writes for long periods of time, which doesn't really happen in the real world because like you're not going to be writing at 3200 megabytes per second for that long because like you would either fill up the drive or just whatever. But anyway, with the 960 though, like Samsung's kind of taken to two different approaches to it. So kind of the traditional approach, like they just made the drive itself, like the controller, more efficient. So it just pulls less power, generates less heat. So there's that. And then also though, like it's really neat. The sticker that just kind of got like your, just model number and just other information on it. Like it actually has like a thin layer of copper in the sticker. So like the sticker kind of serves as somewhat of a heat spreader, which is really neat. And I mean, it's not as good as like a proper heat spreader like I think Crucial is doing on their drive. The problem is like the Crucial drive does not adhere completely to the M.2 spec. So like it's only usable with that heat spreader on like a desktop system. Like it won't work in a laptop because there isn't, like, laptops are made to the M.2 spec, so there isn't room for that type of heat spreader.
Yeah.
Which on a laptop it's usually not a big deal though, because the chassis itself kind of serves as a heat sink, typically. So, but I mean, it makes more sense from the manufacturer's perspective to just have one model for both laptop and desktop, so they're not kind of splitting up production. So yeah, it's really cool that they were able to kind of make the sticker itself like kind of a heat spreader. And then I think a non-tech said that one Samsung engineer, let's see, oh yeah, like they were estimating that about 30% of the thermal performance improvement comes from that heat spreader sticker thing. So I think it's just really cool.
No, for sure. And the sticker's clever. And honestly, the only thing I'm kind of bummed about, because I guess maybe it's selfish because I myself would have considered it, is the fact that 2 terabytes in this form factor is great, but Samsung made the almost assuredly deliberate choice of making that an option only on the Pro model.
Yes,
so I believe the Evo is limited. The
Evo
is only limited to, or the Evo is limited to 1 terabyte, I think.
Yes, you're right. Which
yeah,
I don't like that either, because I mean, you're right. It's almost certainly just a calculated decision to
it's a money grab,
profit margin.
Yeah,
because like I don't really see any technological reason that they couldn't do it on the Evo. And actually, it should be easier.
Yeah, TLC.
Since
you need
TLC,
less silicon for the same amount of storage. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of annoying. And it may be that I would really think that there would be a 2 terabyte Evo at some point. So I don't think that they're going to wait for the next generation before giving us a 2 terabyte Evo. So they'll probably wait a couple months, get those early adopters who just have to have the 2 terabyte, force them to get the Pro, and then come out with the 2 terabyte Evo later.
Yeah.
But yeah, that did annoy me though. You're right.
I guess, maybe in their position, like the right balance of maximizing profit while not being completely jerky would be to launch having the 2 terabyte exclusive to the Pro, and then people who literally don't care about price tags would buy it just to get it now, and then wait 2 or 3 months, and then sort of extend the Evo line to include the 2 terabyte tier, and then folks that are more price sensitive will see their opportunity to jump. But yeah, no, it's just, to me, as I've said on multiple times, and as I've said on the forums, like, it's not just this transition from 3.5 to 2.5 inch form factors that's important, especially from a small form factor context, but like, there's just so much just flat out better with the M.2 form factor in terms of being able to do storage over PCIe and NVMe. And I mean, the big thing has been like, okay, but you're kind of limited in terms of the storage capacities that are achievable, and hitting the 2 terabyte mark. I mean, that's more storage than the vast majority of even like really heavy users ultimately need. And then for folks that need more often than not, they're needing like 10, 12 plus terabytes. And then that's, the quantity of storage that'll always live on, 3.5 inch drives anyway. So the fact that you can have this kind of be a reliable, really large capacity primary drive is awesome. And storage is really kind of where I think the next revolution is going to be in terms of improving performance. We've seen lots of improvements in terms of graphics and CPU and all of this, but it's only been recently that we've seen a lot of architectural changes and a lot of performance improvements in terms of how data is stored and accessed, which is pretty fundamental to any computing experience. So.
Yeah, and then we have the 3DX point sometime.
Yes, which is even more exciting because you have nearly the speed of RAM, but you have the persistence of traditional SSD storage.
Yeah, though I noticed it seems like Intel is kind of backing off on their kind of hype for it. So I'm thinking that the first generation is probably not going to be as impressive as they originally were kind of touting. So
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see once it's coming out. But I've kind of noticed that as we've kind of gotten more solid details about the actual first gen products, it doesn't sound quite as exciting. But I don't know. It's cool though that it because I mean that type of thing like you're saying, the stuff as fast as RAM, but that's non-volatile, has been talked about for ages. So it's cool that it's finally coming to an actual product that you can buy and put in your computer. Though it kind of sucks though that it requires an upgrade to Kaby Lake boards, because the Kaby Lake processors themselves are completely non-exciting compared to Skylake. It's 5% improvement, and that's basically it. So the processors are so boring on the Intel side. So really only interesting, and even then Kaby Lake is only interesting to me because of 3DX point. I don't think anything it adds is anything of note other than support for 3DX point.
I would agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and by the way, this was actually not even the only interesting thing to come out from Samsung recently with respect to storage. One thing that Samsung did that was very interesting to me at the SSD Global Summit, they had a slide, and we were reporting on basically some photos and other things that Tom's Hardware was able to glean because they were present for the event. But Samsung made a point of sort of sharing their projection or expectation in terms of how they foresaw, both from a performance standpoint and from a consumer adoption standpoint, what the market was going to look like through 2018 in terms of okay, here's what's going to change and buying habits, what people are going to buy, and what we can expect from hardware in these subsequent years. And it's always interesting to me when companies kind of go out on a limb and share these projections publicly because, they're kind of doing something that you can hold them accountable to, right? If these things don't come to pass, they kind of have egg on their face. But B, when a company is confident enough to be able to set these benchmarks, they're really kind of going out of their way to sort of make a point of setting folks' expectations, which you only tend to want to do if you're confident in being able to meet or beat them. And Samsung itself is projecting a pretty aggressive turn away from SATA-based SSD storage and towards PCIe-based SSD storage almost unilaterally over the M.2 form factor naturally across all form factors of computing from desktops to naturally mobile, so laptops and tablets as well. So obviously, for me personally, that's exciting to see. If manufacturers are kind of very, very gung-ho about migrating away from SATA, the medium or the interface, and towards M.2 and PCIe and NVMe, then I'm all for that because those are all universally good improvements. But I was just surprised that Samsung was so public about the fact that they foresee that transition being swift and pretty aggressive, at least on their part.
Yeah, so I encourage the listeners to check out the Tom's Hardware article, which we linked it from like the post that I wrote, but just to kind of give some numbers. So in the kind of the slide, so Samsung's basically just kind of lumping all SATA SSDs together. So I'm assuming they didn't make it explicit, but they specifically said SATA. So I'm assuming that includes M.2 SATA. So I don't think they're differentiating like 2.5 inch or anything like that.
I agree, because if you actually look at the slide, the comparison is SATA versus PCIe.
PCIe.
So that implies that they're not speaking towards the actual form factor of the interface so much as the underlying technology.
Yeah. But yeah, so like 2015, it says 67 million SATA drives shipped, and then 7 million PCIe, which that sounds about right. But what blows my mind is like I didn't think we'd see these kind of numbers for another year or 2 or 3. Is they're saying this year already they're seeing 56 million SATA drives, so actually a decrease in SATA drives shipped. So 56 million SATA drives, but 33 million PCIe drives already this year. That's just crazy. I never thought we'd see that. I mean, because
it's really aggressive.
Yeah, the PCIe drives get a lot of like attention on reviews and stuff because I mean they're smoking fast, and SATA drives honestly are so boring to read reviews on because they all do the same thing.
Yep.
Like, they're all bottlenecked by the SATA 3.0 interface, so they all do about all the top end drives max out at about 550 megabyte per second read write sequential. So they're super boring. I mean, there is room for improvement on random read and write, so not saying that like we're maxed out there. There's still definitely room for better drives in that regard, but on the sequential side there's literally nothing better you can do because they're all right at the ceiling of SATA 3.0. But
yeah,
I mean, so like they get a lot of attention, like the NVMe PCI Express drives and review sites and stuff. So I mean, it just makes sense. People want to read reviews of the latest and greatest. But I had no idea that they were actually selling in these kind of quantities already. Like, it's just crazy. But then, like, Samsung's projections are that, like, as early as next year, PCIe will outsell SATA drives. And then by 2018, it will outsell them by, like, over 4 to 1.
Yeah, 5 to 1.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, like I wasn't. I should have. You're wise to bring out the actual specific figures, but like it is crazy how aggressive the adoption is. And it's not just in terms of that transition, but also in terms of the overall size of the market. I mean, from 2016 to 2018, in terms of units shipped, they're expecting literally a doubling. So needless to say, Samsung has high hopes and expectations, A, and B, they're sharing them publicly, which is huge. I mean, there's, it's really a delicate dance that companies have to handle when they're trying to really get people to have the right expectations in terms of how markets are going to change that they're competing in, especially when you think that, for publicly traded companies, they have to be responsible about this. They can't do anything that would later on be perceived as deceptive, and they have shareholders to report to and all of this. So the fact that Samsung's going on stage and is like, oh yeah, we think that this is the future. We think this is what you can expect for the next, 2-3 years. And it's like this dramatic of a change, this dramatic of a growth in the market, this dramatic of a fundamental difference in what most people will be buying in such a short span. I mean, storage just hasn't traditionally not moved that quickly. Hardware just traditionally doesn't move this quickly, period. So it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's really crazy that, because they're saying that by 2018 they're projecting to sell more PCIe NVMe drives than like total drive SSDs sold this year. So that's crazy. And I'm really hoping we kind of hit like kind of an inflection point where enough people have like high performance drives that software is specifically built to take advantage of it. Because that's kind of the problem is like, SSDs are not new. They've been a thing, just in like the basic technology has been around, I think, since the 80s. But like in the consumer market, I think I would say probably about 2009, they started becoming like cheap enough that like normal people could consider it. And definitely within the last couple of years, it's seen quite a bit of adoption. But like, I mean, to be realistic though, I mean, the vast majority of machines, like just your normal person goes down to the normal big box store and buys a computer, like 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a hard drive. Um, so like, I'm really hoping that not only do we see like more of those basic computers get switched to SSDs, I would really like to see them get switched to like PCIe drives.
Yeah.
Just because like once you have like a big enough market that has not just an SSD, which is already like a huge step up over a hard drive, but like an NVMe, like high performance drive, or maybe even 3D point at some time in the future. Like I would love to see software take advantage of it, because I think we're kind of at the point now where like from the normal SATA SSD to like a PCIe SSD, because I mean you're talking like SATA drive maximum's about 550 megabytes per second, and then you talk like the 960 Pro, which can do like over 3 gigabytes per second read. And I feel like software, like a lot of software just doesn't really take advantage of it. And I think it's also because like a lot of software just isn't multi-threaded, so like you're kind of bottlenecked by the single CPU thread. So I think there's a lot more performance, like actual perceptible performance improvements to be had once software kind of is better coded to take advantage of multiple threads and then these like crazy fast storage. Like once that happens, I think we'll see like a really big leap in like how fast the computer actually feels day-to-day use. So I really would love to see, I mean, really high performance drives is cool, but I would really love to see like more adoption of it. So that's another big part of why I'm excited that Samsung sees such a big market for these high-end PCIe drives. Because I would just like I think for a big part of it, I think is just people's expectations of capacity. Because for the longest time, it's just like more storage is better. Like if this computer has 500 gigabytes and that one has 750, the 750 one's obviously better. So I would love to see that kind of mindset go away. Because we're to the point. I think it's cheap enough now that we could like HP and Dell and whatever could afford to sell like a relatively low end computer with a 250 gig SSD. Like the price is comparable enough to like a kind of a cheaper hard drive that they could do it, but like they would just get murdered in the market because like people would just see that 250 gigabyte and the one next to it has like a terabyte of storage. So like without any kind of like education for the consumer, like the 250 gig machine will never sell, even though it's like realistically most consumers don't need a terabyte, or they don't even need 250 from what I've seen. But they would very much benefit from the speed of an SSD versus like the extra capacity of the hard drive. So I would really love to see kind of like the manufacturers like Dell and HP and stuff kind of step up their marketing and education to kind of tell people why they would want an SSD versus a larger hard drive.
Yeah.
Because like it's so frustrating to me to see, because I see this all the time. Like all these machines, like nice computers, i3s, i5s, but then they have a hard drive in it, and they just, like to me, who's been using an SSD for so long, they just feel so slow just using it. Like even though like on paper it's a very nice machine, like 8 gigs of RAM, i5 processor, all that good stuff, but then it's like it's saddled with a hard drive and it runs, to me it just runs like dirt. And then like I work on some other machine that has like a Pentium, but it has an SSD, and so like for just surfing the internet, checking the email and stuff, it just runs circles around that other machine, which I find amusing. So I just it's so frustrating because it just seems like so many machines, like people would just enjoy using their computers so much more if they just had SSDs, but it's just like Dell and HP and stuff just refuse to do it because, well, I mean, they basically are forced to, just because people are just, they've just been told for so long that like bigger is better, which is just frustrating. But I don't know. Well, I guess it's kind of HP and Dell, and all of them fall because they started it. It's like they set out originally with just bigger is better, and now they're kind of stuck with it. I don't know.
All right. Well, with that, we have wrapped up the news, and so naturally we move on to the final segment of the podcast, which for this week is the Freakin' free, fantastic, functional, feisty, fully flavorful, fabulous favorite form Fread of the Fortuitous Fortnight.
Well done.
And thank you. And for this week, that is the space inefficiency thread, which is delightfully entertaining and hilarious to just read through. If you haven't browsed through it yet, I highly encourage you to do so. It's basically an open question that, James, you started. You saw a guy bring in a massive desktop enclosure, and like maybe 30% of it had actually been filled with parts. And so,
yes, and I see this all the time. It's like, so I mean, it's not that I expect everybody to be like super into SFF. I mean, if people want to do it in big old ATX case and a big old ATX system, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. What really gets me though is these people who have these humongous cases and then like what's in it does not come anywhere close to justifying it. So yeah, what started this is, I forget what case this is. It's like a Roswell or something like that. But it's a 90-liter case. Like, it is very much a full tower case, like by any definition. So 90-liter case, and all that's in it is a GTX 780, a capture card, 2 sticks of RAM, 1 3.5-inch drive, and 1 2.5-inch drive. That's it. So like, I mean, if you look at the picture here, this case has like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 5.25 bays, which I think they kind of double as 3.5-inch bays. Like there's a hard drive cage that can kind of like be placed wherever you want within that. But yeah, so you have all these 5.25 bays. Only one of them's used for a DVD drive, like an actual 5.25 device. And then, like I said, he's got 1 3.5-inch drive, 1 2.5-inch drive. And then it looks like he has like a 1,000-watt power supply or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, single video card. He actually does have one expansion card besides a video card, which is actually very, very unusual. Very, very rarely do I run into anybody who has any other card other than just like a video card.
Yeah.
If they even have a video card.
Because like, what is it even going to be? Like maybe a capture card sometimes, or?
Well, I think he does, if I recall, video editing or something like that. So, I mean, I believe he does use it. It's not just for kicks and giggles. He actually does use it. So this is like, just like a hair bit more justified than most machines I see. But still, I mean, you have like, this is all in like a 90-liter case, like literally over half of which is just empty. It's just ridiculous. But I see this all the time though, is the problem. Is like, I see like people build these, like get these really huge cases kind of with the expectation that one day they'll fill it up with parts, and then they never do. So then I see them and they're always like this. They're just like half or 2/3 of the case is just like empty space.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so the rest of the thread is kind of like just examples like that. And then I think John, you ran into one recently that's like a particularly interesting OEM version.
Yeah, I bought a motherboard off one of our local auction sites, so I was trying to figure out find a user manual for it. I found this system that it was an ITX board. It had a power brick import and stuff like that. Trying to figure out what system it came from, and when I found the case, I laughed out loud for quite a bit of time. Like it's it looks like your standard HP kind of micro ATX tower, but the power supply, the ATX power supply area is not punched out. The expansion slot bits are not punched out. All it is basically the IO shield and a fan. It comes with a single hard drive and a single optical drive because it's only got 2 SATA ports. So all of this wasted space.
And I bet if if like you have folks that got the bargain basement configuration from like iBuyPower or what have you, that like the vast majority of those is like 80% air. Oh man.
But it's high performance
Yeah,
air.
I mean that's right.
Overclocked air.
It's only the highest quality air. They're very picky. But yeah, it's maybe a little mildly infuriating, but entertaining to say the least to just browse through. And lots of folks had funny anecdotes or stories or just great pictures of just, ugh, what are these people thinking?
Or not
what are they thinking?
Not thinking.
They weren't thinking. That's exactly right. They were not thinking. It's just awful. It's terrible. And I can't stop looking at it.
It's like a train wreck.
Yeah, it really is. All right. Well, with that, we're going to have to wrap things up. But thank you, listeners, for tuning in as always. And, of course, my thanks to both James and John for joining me this early morning, or in John's case, this very, very late evening.
Well, it's really, really early morning now for him.
That's right, yeah. I'll always forget about daylight savings. But, thank you all for tuning in. And I don't know, do you guys have any plans for the upcoming week?
I'm hoping to get, well, I don't know if it'll arrive here by then, but I'm hoping to get some new hardware from HDplex. So got a new DC-DC unit, a new AC-DC unit, and then a PCIe extender. I think it's a 25 centimeter, I think is what he said. So, I don't know. It'd be, if it's 25 centimeter and then as flexible as like the current one, I think it'll be a really interesting product.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to be receiving those, though.
How about you, John?
Reinstalling Windows and probably reinstalling everything in my house. There's people moving out.
Fun. Well, I look forward to the next round of news and views for our next episode. But thanks again for joining me, guys. And to you, the listener, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next week.